12-year-old Jake Thompson was having the most boring Monday of his life. Mrs. Henderson stood at the front of the biology classroom, droning on about cellular respiration and mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell. Jake had heard that phrase about 1,000 times already this semester. He glanced at the clock. Only 20 minutes until lunch. His stomach growled quietly, reminding him that he'd skipped breakfast that morning. Outside the window he could see the football team practicing on the field, their shouts barely audible through the glass. That's when his nose started to itch. At first it was just a small tickle, the kind you can ignore if you try hard enough. Jake wrinkled his nose and tried to focus on Mrs. Henderson's diagram of a cell on the whiteboard. But the tickle grew stronger. He rubbed his nose with the back of his hand, hoping no one noticed. The itching sensation spread deeper, almost like something was crawling inside his nostrils. "Jake, are you paying attention?" Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through his discomfort. "Yes, ma'am," he mumbled, feeling his face grow hot with embarrassment. A few kids snickered behind him. But the tickle wouldn't stop. It intensified, becoming almost painful. His eyes watered. He felt a strange warmth building in his chest, spreading up through his throat and into his sinuses. Something was wrong. Really wrong. Then it happened. Jake sneezed. But this wasn't a normal sneeze. The moment he opened his mouth, a jet of bright crimson fire exploded from his nose and mouth like a flamethrower. The flames shot across his desk in a blazing arc, instantly igniting his biology textbook. The pages curled and blackened as fire consumed them. His notebook caught next, then the wooden edge of his desk began to smoke. For a split second, nobody moved. Everyone just stared in stunned silence. Then the screaming started. "Fire!" someone yelled from the back row. Students jumped from their seats, knocking over chairs as they scrambled toward the door. Lisa, who sat next to Jake, fell backward off her chair in her panic to get away from him. The smoke alarm began shrieking, and within seconds the ceiling sprinklers burst to life, showering the entire classroom with cold water. Jake sat frozen in his seat, staring at his hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. Steam rose from his desk where water met flame. What had just happened? Had he really just sneezed fire? That was impossible. People didn't breathe fire. Dragons did. But dragons weren't real. Were they? Mrs. Henderson grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall, her hands shaking so badly she could barely aim it. White foam sprayed across Jake's desk, finally smothering the flames. Principal Davis burst through the door, his tie askew, eyes wide with panic. "Everyone out. Evacuate now," he shouted, herding the soaking wet students into the hallway. Jake tried to stand, but his legs felt like jelly. Mrs. Henderson grabbed his arm, not roughly but firmly. "Come on, Jake. We need to get you outside." The next hour passed in a blur. Police cars arrived with their sirens wailing. Paramedics checked Jake for burns but found nothing wrong with him. His skin wasn't even warm to the touch. News vans pulled up to the school gates, reporters already talking into cameras. Someone had filmed the whole thing on their phone, and Jake could hear his classmates showing the video to anyone who would look. By the time Jake's parents arrived, his mom Rachel's face was pale and streaked with tears. His dad Tom looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. They held him tight, asking if he was okay, if he was hurt. Jake didn't know how to answer. He wasn't hurt, but he definitely wasn't okay. The school sent everyone home early. By noon, Jake's video was everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Millions of views already. Comments ranged from "obviously fake" to "that kid is a mutant" to "call the X-Men." But Jake knew it wasn't fake. He could still feel that strange warmth in his chest, like a pilot light that refused to go out. By evening, as Jake sat in his living room with his parents trying to figure out what to do next, 3 black SUVs pulled up outside their house. Men in dark suits and sunglasses emerged, their faces expressionless. They knocked on the door with the kind of authority that suggested they weren't asking permission to enter. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," the lead agent said, flashing a badge too quickly for anyone to read properly. "We need to discuss your son's condition. For his safety and the safety of others." Rachel started to cry again. Tom put his arm around her shoulders, his jaw set tight. "Our son isn't going anywhere until we know what's happening to him." The agent opened his mouth to respond, but he never got the chance. The sky outside suddenly went dark. Not the darkness of nightfall, but something else entirely. Something massive was blocking out the sun. Everyone rushed to the windows. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Wings. Enormous wings stretched across the sky, blotting out the evening light. Not birds. Not planes. Something far larger and far more terrifying. Dragons. Massive reptilian creatures descended from the clouds, their scales gleaming like polished armor in the fading sunlight. They were every color imaginable: copper, silver, deep emerald green, midnight black. They landed in the street, on rooftops, in the school parking lot across the way. The asphalt cracked and buckled under their immense weight. Car alarms shrieked. People ran screaming from their homes. The largest dragon, with scales the color of molten copper and eyes like burning amber, landed directly in front of Jake's house. The ground shook. The SUVs looked like toy cars next to its massive clawed feet. The dragon lowered its enormous head and looked directly through the window at Jake. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant, like an earthquake-given sound. The boy bears the mark of fire. He belongs to us now. Jake's eyes snapped open, and for a moment he thought he was dreaming. The last thing he remembered was the copper dragon reaching toward him, his mother screaming, and then darkness. Now he was lying on something that felt like a bed but wasn't quite right. It was too smooth, too perfectly shaped to his body. He sat up slowly, his head spinning. The room around him looked like something out of a science fiction movie. The walls weren't really walls at all. They seemed carved from crystal, but crystal that glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. The light moved through the material in waves, creating patterns that hurt his eyes if he stared too long. Jake stood on shaky legs and immediately noticed the ceiling. It was completely transparent, like looking through the clearest glass he'd ever seen. And through it he could see something that made his stomach drop. His planet was getting smaller by the second, shrinking away into the darkness of space. He could see the blue oceans, the swirls of white clouds, the brown patches of continents. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. He pressed his hand against the crystal wall, feeling its coolness against his palm. "Mom? Dad?" His voice came out as a whisper. No answer. A shadow fell across the floor and Jake spun around. His heart hammered in his chest. The copper dragon stood at the far end of the chamber. But something was different. It wasn't the massive, building-sized creature that had landed in his neighborhood. This version was smaller, though still huge compared to Jake. Maybe the size of an elephant, if elephants had wings and scales and eyes that glowed like hot coals. Those amber eyes locked onto Jake with an intensity that made every hair on his body stand up. The dragon didn't blink. Didn't move. Just watched him with an expression Jake couldn't read. Was it curious? Angry? Hungry? "I am Gareth," the dragon finally spoke, his voice rolling through the chamber like distant thunder. Each word seemed to vibrate in Jake's chest. "Leader of the fire clans of the Northern Reach. Commander of 3 fleets. Guardian of the eternal flame." Jake's mouth went dry. He wanted to say something, anything, but words wouldn't come out. "You should not exist, human child," Gareth continued, taking a step closer. His claws clicked against the crystal floor, and Jake noticed they were longer than kitchen knives. "Your very presence defies the laws we have understood for millions of years." I didn't mean to sneeze fire," Jake finally managed to stammer out. His voice sounded tiny and weak compared to Gareth's. "I don't even understand what's happening. Why am I here? Where are my parents?" Gareth's head tilted slightly, studying Jake like a scientist might study a strange bug under a microscope. "Your parents are safe on your world. They were not harmed. But you could not stay there. Not after what you revealed." "Revealed? I just sneezed." "You unleashed dragon fire," Gareth corrected, his tail swishing slowly across the floor behind him. "Do you understand what that means? Dragons are the oldest fire-bearers in this galaxy. We have existed since before your son was born. Millions of years ago, we seeded life on countless worlds, spreading our essence across the stars. Your Earth was one of those worlds." Jake shook his head, trying to process what he was hearing. "But that's impossible. Humans evolved from apes. We learned about it in school. Your species did evolve naturally," Gareth acknowledged. "But the spark that gave your world life came from us. However, humans were never meant to carry our essence directly. Your biology is too different. Too fragile. The fire should have remained dormant in your genetic code forever, nothing more than a shadow of what once was." "Then why did I sneeze fire?" "That is what we intend to discover." A door slid open in the wall, though Jake hadn't seen any scene there before. Another dragon entered, smaller than Gareth, with scales that shimmered silver blue like moonlight on water. This one had a more delicate build, and her movements were quieter, more graceful. "His vitals are stable, Gareth," she said, glancing at something Jake couldn't see, maybe some kind of display only dragons could read. "I've been monitoring him since we brought him aboard. By all logic, by everything we know about biology and physics, he should have burned from the inside out the moment he produced dragonfire. Yet I didn't burn, Jake said quietly, looking down at his hands. They looked normal. Just regular 12-year-old hands. No burns. No scars. Not even warm to the touch. The female dragon turned to face him fully, and Jake noticed her eyes were softer than Gareth's, more curious than intimidating. No, you didn't? And that's what frightens us, young one. I'm Beth, she continued, stepping closer. I'm a researcher, what you might call a scientist. I study biology and genetics. And you, Jake Thompson, are the most fascinating puzzle I've encountered in 300 years. 300 years? Jake's eyes went wide. How old are you? Old enough to know that what's happening to you shouldn't be possible, Beth replied. A human body doesn't have the cellular structure to contain dragonfire. The heat alone should have cooked you from within. The energy required should have torn your DNA apart. But instead you're standing here, completely healthy, asking questions. Gareth's tail swished again, this time more forcefully. The council demands answers. They are gathering as we speak, representatives from all the fire clans across the galaxy. They want to know if you are a miracle we should celebrate, or a threat we must eliminate. The word, eliminate, hung in the air like a knife. Jake felt his knees go weak. I'm not a threat, he said, hating how his voice shook. I'm just a kid who sneezed wrong. Perhaps, Gareth rumbled. Or perhaps you are the beginning of something that could change everything we understand about fire, about life, about the universe itself. Either way, human child, your life will never be the same. Jake lost track of how many days he'd been on the dragon ship. There were no clocks, no windows showing day or night. Just the endless blue glow of the crystal walls and the view of space through the ceiling. He guessed it had been about a week, maybe more. Beth came to see him every day, sometimes twice. At first, the tests were simple. She asked him to hold still while strange devices scanned his body with beams of light. The machines hummed and beeped, displaying information in a language Jake couldn't read. Beth would study the results with her head tilted, making soft clicking sounds that he realized was how dragons showed they were thinking hard about something. Then the tests got more intense. She drew his blood with a needle that looked way too big for any human hospital. Jake tried not to look as the vial filled with dark red liquid. Beth held it up to the light, and Jake swore he saw tiny sparks dancing inside it, like fireflies trapped in his bloodstream. Fascinating, Beth whispered, more to herself than to him. The DNA scans were weird. Beth had him stand in a circular chamber while rings of light passed up and down his body. He felt a tingling sensation like static electricity, but it didn't hurt. When it was done, Beth showed him a holographic display that appeared in the air between them. It looked like a twisted ladder made of light, constantly rotating and shifting colors. This is your genetic code, Beth explained, pointing with one claw at specific sections. Every living thing has one. It's like an instruction manual that tells your cells how to build your body. Jake stared at the glowing strands. Some sections were blue, others green, but scattered throughout were spots that burned with an orange-red light. Those red parts, Jake said. Those aren't normal, are they? No, Beth admitted. Those are dragon markers. Pieces of our DNA mixed into yours. But look closer. She manipulated the display, zooming in on one of the red sections. See how they've changed? They're not pure dragon DNA anymore. They've merged with your human code and created something entirely new. The most intense test was when Beth asked Jake to summon his fire again. He'd been afraid to try since the incident at school, worried he might burn down the ship or hurt someone. But Beth insisted they needed to measure it properly. She led him to a large empty chamber with walls that looked like black metal. This room can withstand temperatures hot enough to melt most planets, she assured him. You won't hurt anyone. Jake stood in the center, feeling small and exposed. I don't know how to control it. Last time it just happened. Then let it happen again, Beth encouraged. Don't think too hard. Just feel. Jake closed his eyes and tried to remember the moment before he sneezed. That warmth in his chest. That tingling in his nose. He focused on that feeling, reaching for it. At first, nothing happened. Then he felt it, a flicker of heat deep inside. He opened his mouth and fire poured out. Not a sneeze this time, but a controlled stream of crimson flames that shot across the room. The heat was incredible, but it didn't burn him. It felt natural, like breathing. Beth watched her instruments with wide eyes. When Jake finally stopped, exhausted, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Was it fear? Amazement? Oh, Jake, she said slowly, your fire burns at temperatures we haven't seen in dragon youth for centuries. You're 12 years old, and you're producing flames that would make our warriors jealous. That evening, Beth came to his room looking tired. Her scales seemed duller somehow, and she moved with less energy than usual. She sat down across from him, her tail curling around her feet. "This is impossible," she muttered, pulling up another holographic display. Jake had seen enough of these by now to recognize his own genetic code. "You have dragon markers in your DNA, but they've evolved. Changed into something we've never seen before. Is that bad?" Jake asked, though he was pretty sure he already knew the answer. Beth was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "It might be the answer we've been desperately searching for." "Answer to what?" Beth looked at him with those silver blue eyes, and Jake saw something he hadn't expected to see in a dragon. Sadness. Deep, endless sadness. "We're dying, Jake. My species. The dragons. We're going extinct." Jake felt his stomach drop. "What? But you're so powerful. You have spaceships and technology and none of it matters," Beth interrupted gently. 500 years ago, dragon eggs hatched at a steady rate. Families had children. Our population was strong. Then something changed. Fewer eggs began to hatch each year. The ones that did hatch were weaker, their fire less intense. She pulled up another display showing graphs and charts that Jake didn't fully understand, but the downward trends were obvious even to him. "Our fire used to be capable of melting asteroids, of powering our ships, of warming entire worlds. Now it barely keeps our caverns heated through winter. We've searched dozens of galaxies for an answer. We've consulted archives older than your sun. We've tried genetic enhancements, medical treatments, even ancient magic rituals. Nothing worked. Then I appeared," Jake said quietly, understanding dawning on him. "Then you appeared," Beth confirmed. "A human child producing fire stronger and hotter than most dragons your age could ever hope to achieve. You're not supposed to exist, Jake. By every law of nature we understand, you should be dead. But you're not. You're thriving." Jake's hands started to shake. "What does the council want to do with me?" Beth looked away, and that's when Jake knew. That's when real fear set in. "They want to extract your essence," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Study it. Break it down to its most basic components. They believe you hold the key to saving our species." "And what happens to me?" Jake asked, though he already knew. Beth's silence was answer enough. Jake was lying in his chamber when the ship suddenly shuddered. Alarms began blaring, a high-pitched wail that made his ears ring. Red lights flashed along the crystal walls, turning everything crimson. He jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. Beth burst through the door, her scales bristling with agitation. "Earth's military has found us. They've been tracking our position for days, and now they're here." "My parents?" Jake asked immediately. "Safe on the surface," Beth assured him. "But your government wants you back. They've sent warships." Jake rushed to the transparent ceiling and looked out. Sure enough, he could see them. Dozens of human spacecraft, small compared to the dragon ship but armed with weapons that glowed with blue energy. They surrounded the dragon vessel like angry wasps around a nest. A booming voice suddenly echoed through the ship, transmitted from the human fleet. Jake recognized it as English, his language, and hearing it after days of dragon speech made his chest tight with homesickness. "This is Admiral Mike Carson of the United Earth Coalition. You have taken a human child without permission. We demand his immediate return. You have 48 hours to comply, or we will consider this an act of war." Jake's stomach twisted. "War? Between humans and dragons? Because of him?" Beth looked at him with worry in her eyes. "The council is meeting now. This has complicated everything." She didn't need to say more. Jake understood. If the dragons were already considering taking his essence to save their species, a human threat would only make them more desperate. They might decide to act quickly before Earth could interfere. An hour later, Jake found himself standing outside the council chamber. The doors were massive, carved with images of dragons breathing fire across star fields. He could hear raised voices inside, arguing in the dragon language. He recognized Gareth's deep rumble, but there were others too, older and angrier. "You can't go in there," Beth whispered, though she'd been the one who led him here. "If they find you eavesdropping." "I'm not eavesdropping," Jake said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "I'm going in." Before Beth could stop him, he pushed against the door. It was heavy, but it swung open. The council chamber fell silent immediately. The room was enormous, circular, with a domed ceiling that showed the stars above. At least 20 dragons sat in a circle, each one massive and ancient-looking. Their scales bore scars from countless battles. Their eyes held the weight of thousands of years. Gareth sat at the head of the circle. When he saw Jake, something flashed across his face. Surprise? Respect? Jake couldn't tell. But before Gareth could speak, another dragon rose. This one was even larger than Gareth, with scales the deep red of cooling lava. Scars crisscrossed his face and one of his eyes was clouded with age. When he spoke, the floor vibrated. Who dares interrupt the council? The red dragon's voice was like rocks grinding together. That would be me, Jake said, walking forward even though his legs felt like they might give out any second. I'm the reason you're all arguing. I figure I should have a say. The red dragon's good eye fixed on Jake. I am Victor, eldest of the fire clans. I have lived for 4,000 years, boy. I watched stars be born and die. And you think you have wisdom to offer this council? No, Jake admitted. I'm 12. I don't have wisdom. But I do have an idea. Victor snorted, smoke curling from his nostrils. The human child wishes to speak. Very well. Speak. But know that we have already decided. One human child's life against our entire species? The choice is clear. Jake felt ice in his veins. They'd already decided to extract his essence. To kill him. He had one chance to change their minds. Don't take from me, Jake said, forcing his voice to stay steady. Learn from all of us. From humans. The council erupted in laughter and angry roars. Several dragons stood, their tails lashing. But Gareth held up a claw, and the chamber fell silent again. Explain yourself, boy, Gareth said, his amber eyes intense. Jake took a deep breath. This was it. Everything depended on what he said next. Beth told me your fire is dying because your species stopped changing. You became too perfect, too stable. You mastered everything and then you just stopped. But humans? We're chaos. We're messy and unpredictable. We make mistakes all the time. He looked around at the ancient dragons. We survived ice ages that should have killed us. We survived plagues that wiped out half our population. We survived wars and famines and disasters. Not because we were powerful like you. Not because we had fire or could fly or had technology. We survived because we adapted. Because we refused to give up. Because we're too stubborn to die. Some of the dragons leaned forward, listening now. Maybe that's what's in my DNA, Jake continued. Maybe human stubbornness mixed with your dragon essence and created something new. Something that can help both our species. But if you just take it from me, you'll only have a sample. You'll be trying to copy something you don't understand. Victor's scarred face twisted into a sneer. Pretty words from a child trying to save his own skin. But words mean nothing. Can you prove it? Beth suddenly stepped forward from where she'd been hiding near the door. Let him take the trial of embers. The council chamber exploded with shocked roars. Gareth stood, his eyes wide. Beth, no. That trial kills most adult dragons. He's a human child. Exactly, Jake said, the idea clicking into place in his mind. If I survive something that kills your adults, then you'll know humans have something worth learning from. You'll know my way has merit. Victor studied Jake for a long moment. Then slowly he began to laugh. It was a terrible sound, like boulders falling down a mountain. The human child has fire in him after all. Not just in his breath but in his spirit. Very well. I accept this proposal. Let him face the trial of embers. If he survives, we consider his plan. If he dies. Victor shrugged his massive shoulders. Then we have our answer anyway. Gareth looked at Jake with something that might have been admiration or might have been pity. Jake Thompson, do you understand what you're agreeing to? The trial of embers takes place in a pocket dimension where plasma storms rage at temperatures that exceed most stars. It is designed to test if young dragons have the strength to join our warrior clans. Most fail. Many die. Jake thought of his parents. His mom's smile. His dad's terrible jokes. His friends at school. His boring biology class that now seemed like paradise. He might never see any of them again. But if he didn't try, he was dead anyway. At least this way he had a chance. I understand, Jake said. When do we start? Gareth's expression was unreadable. The trial begins at dawn. Jake didn't sleep that night. How could he? Tomorrow he would either prove that humans had something worth offering the dragons, or he would die trying. Both options seemed equally terrifying. When the artificial dawn came, lighting up the crystal walls of his chamber, Beth arrived to escort him. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her scales seemed duller, and her eyes carried a weight that made Jake's chest tight. You don't have to do this, she said quietly as they walked through the ship's corridors. We could find another way. maybe negotiate with the council, buy more time. There is no more time, Jake interrupted gently. You said it yourself. Your species is dying. And Earth is threatening war. If I don't do this, people will die. Dragons will die. This is the only way. They reached a massive chamber Jake had never seen before. It was completely empty except for a circular platform in the center. The platform glowed with symbols that hurt to look at, like they existed in more dimensions than Jake's eyes could process. Around the chamber stood the entire council, every elder dragon present to witness what was about to happen. Victor, the scarred red dragon, watched Jake with his one good eye. The human child arrives. How brave. Or how foolish. Gareth stepped forward, his copper scales reflecting the strange light from the platform. His face was impossible to read. Jake Thompson, what you are about to face is a pocket dimension, a realm that exists outside normal space. Inside, plasma storms rage at temperatures that exceed the core of most stars. It is where we test our young warriors before they join the fire clans. How many pass? Jake asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Perhaps 1 in 5, Gareth admitted. And those are dragons, creatures born to withstand fire. For a human. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Beth walked Jake to the edge of the platform. She knelt down so her eyes were level with his. Listen to me carefully. Your fire alone won't be enough in there. The heat will overwhelm it. You'll need to find something deeper, something that burns hotter than any physical flame. What do you mean? I can't tell you, Beth said, touching her claw gently to his chest, right over his heart. You have to discover it yourself. But humans have it. I've seen it in your history, in your stories, in the way you survive impossible things. Trust yourself. She handed him a small crystal. If it becomes too much, crush this. It will pull you back out. There's no shame in admitting defeat. Jake looked at the crystal, then back at Beth. Slowly, deliberately, he set it down on the ground. I'm not coming back unless I walk out on my own. Beth's eyes widened, then filled with something that looked like pride. Gareth moved to the platform and spread his wings. Energy crackled around him as he began to chant in the ancient dragon language. The symbols on the platform blazed brighter, and a tear appeared in the air above it. Through the opening, Jake could see swirling chaos, reds and oranges and whites all mixing together in a storm of pure heat. Enter human, Gareth said, his voice heavy with ceremony. Show us what your kind is made of. Jake took a deep breath. Then another. His legs wanted to run, but he forced them forward. He stepped onto the platform. The symbols burned beneath his feet, but he didn't stop. One more step. Then another. And then he jumped through the portal. The heat hit him like a physical wall, like someone had thrown him into the sun. His skin blistered immediately, pain screaming through every nerve. The air itself was on fire. He couldn't see anything but brightness, couldn't hear anything but the roar of the plasma storm. He tried to summon his dragon fire, the crimson flames that had started all of this. They came, flickering around his body like a thin shield. But they were weak, pathetic against the inferno surrounding him. The storm pushed against his fire, crushing it down, suffocating it. Jake fell to his knees. The ground beneath him wasn't really ground at all, just solidified energy that burned through his pants. He was going to die here. In this impossible place, alone, burned to nothing. No. That single thought cut through the pain. No. He wasn't going to die. Not like this. Not after everything. Anger flooded through him. He was angry at being taken from his family. Angry at being tested like some laboratory experiment. Angry at the unfairness of being a 12-year-old kid thrust into a situation way bigger than himself. Angry that the dragons thought they could just decide his fate without asking him. His fire flared brighter, shifting from crimson to orange. But beneath the anger he found something else. Well, he thought of his mom's face when she hugged him goodbye, tears streaming down her cheeks. His dad trying to be brave but looking terrified. He thought of his friends at school, his boring classes, his normal life that he missed so desperately. The fire turned golden, pushing back against the storm. And deeper still, beneath even the love, Jake found determination. Pure, stubborn human determination. The same thing that had driven his ancestors to cross frozen continents and vast oceans. The same thing that made humanity look at the stars and decide to reach them. The same refusal to quit that Beth had talked about. Even if he died here, he would die fighting. He would die proving that humans were worth something. That they had value beyond being studied or extracted or used. His fire exploded outward. It wasn't crimson anymore. It wasn't even gold. It burned white, brilliant white with veins of gold running through it like lightning. The flames didn't just protect him now. They pushed back against the plasma storm itself, carving a path through the chaos. Jake stood up. His legs were steady now. He understood something the dragons had forgotten. Fire wasn't just about heat or energy. It was about will. About emotion. About purpose. Dragonfire burned fuel, yes, but it also burned everything else. Hope. Rage. Love. Determination. And humans had those things in abundance. Maybe that's what dragons had lost over their millions of years of perfection. Maybe they'd forgotten what it felt like to burn with purpose instead of just power. Jake walked forward through the storm. Each step was easier than the last. His white gold fire blazed around him like wings, like armor, like a declaration that he refused to be broken. When he finally saw the exit portal ahead, he didn't run for it. He walked with his head high, his fire blazing, his heart full of everything that made him human. He stepped through. The council chamber was completely silent. Every dragon stared at him with wide eyes. His clothes had burned away to ash, but his skin was unmarked. Not even a scratch. White gold flames still danced along his arms, his shoulders, his hair. Slowly, deliberately, Gareth lowered his massive head until it nearly touched the ground. It was a gesture of respect, of submission even. "I was wrong," Gareth said, his voice filled with awe. "You are neither threat nor miracle, Jake Thompson. You are a bridge. A connection between what we were and what we might become." Victor, the ancient scarred dragon, laughed. But this time it wasn't mocking. It was genuine, joyful. The human child teaches the old dragons a lesson. Perhaps we have been too perfect for too long. Perhaps we need a little chaos after all. 6 months passed in a blur of activity that changed both worlds forever. Jake stood on a stage in the United Nations Assembly Hall in New York City. He'd been here once on a school field trip, staring up at the tall building in awe. Now he stood at its very center, wearing a simple suit his mom had helped him pick out. Behind him stood Gareth and a delegation of 5 dragons, each representing a different clan. Their presence made the assembly hall feel smaller, but they'd shifted to their smallest forms out of respect for human architecture. Before him sat representatives from every nation on Earth. Presidents, prime ministers, ambassadors, all gathered for what the news was calling the most important moment in human history. Jake's hands shook slightly as he gripped the podium. Public speaking had always terrified him. But he'd walked through a plasma storm. He could handle this. 6 months ago, Jake began, his voice amplified through the hall, "I sneezed fire in biology class. It seemed like the end of my normal life. In a way it was. But it was also a beginning." He looked back at Gareth, who nodded encouragingly. "Today we announced the formation of the First Alliance. A partnership between humanity and the dragon clans that will benefit both our species." The assembly remained silent, hanging on every word. "The dragons will share their technology with us. Clean energy sources. Faster than light travel. Medical advances that could cure diseases we've struggled with for centuries. They'll share their knowledge of the stars, of worlds beyond our imagination." Jake paused, letting that sink in. "And what do we give them in return? We share ourselves. Our adaptability. Our creativity. Our stubborn refusal to give up when things get hard. Our chaos, which isn't a weakness but a strength." On the massive screens throughout the hall, images appeared. Human volunteers training with dragon instructors, learning to sense the fire that lay dormant in their own DNA. Dragon eggs in special chambers, exposed to human genetic markers, showing signs of vitality that hadn't been seen in centuries. Scientists from both species working side by side in laboratories that mixed crystal technology with human innovation. Already, the first human volunteers are learning to touch the fire within them, Jake continued. "Not everyone can do what I did. But many can learn to work with fire, to understand it, to use it. And the dragons are seeing their eggs hatch at rates they haven't experienced in hundreds of years." His mom and dad sat in the front row, his mom wiping tears from her eyes. His dad gave him a thumbs up, grinning like an idiot. Jake smiled back. "I'm not special," Jake said. "I'm just a kid who got lucky or unlucky depending on how you look at it. But I learned something in that plasma storm. The strongest power doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from refusing to quit. From loving hard enough to fight for what matters. From being messy and chaotic and wonderfully, stubbornly human." He looked up at Beth, who stood near Gareth. She'd become his friend over these months, teaching him about dragon culture while learning about human movies and music. She winked at him, an expression she'd learned from hanging around humans too much. "So today isn't just about an alliance between species," Jake finished. "It's about recognizing that our differences make us stronger. That sometimes the answer to impossible problems comes from the most unexpected places. He stepped back from the podium. The assembly erupted in applause. Gareth moved forward to sign the official treaty documents, his claw surprisingly delicate as he marked his name in the ancient dragon script. Later, as Jake stood on the UN building's observation deck looking out over the city, Beth joined him. "You did well, young one," she said. "I just told the truth," Jake replied. His fire still burned white gold whenever he called it forth. It had stayed that way since the trial, a constant reminder of what he'd learned. That the strongest flames didn't just burn with heat but with purpose. With love. With the stubborn, chaotic, beautiful determination that made humans who they were. Above them, dragon ships moved through the sky alongside human aircraft, sharing the same space, heading toward the same future. Jake Thompson wasn't just the boy who sneezed fire anymore. He was the spark that lit a new era, the bridge between two worlds, the proof that sometimes the smallest flame could light the biggest fire. And that fire was just beginning to burn.